Her main research interests include first and second-hand bioethanol production from lignocellulosic biomass, microbial oil, protein, and biopolymer production from organic waste streams. Madam has participated in several international, national, and regional research projects on the valorization of low-cost agricultural, municipal, and industrial residues. Her current research interests include extractive biotransformation, design and engineering of enzymes, selective isolation and capture of natural bioactive molecules, secondary agriculture and its products, process development and intensification for enzymatic and microbial systems, bioproduct characterization and scale-up. It's my pleasure and privilege to extend a cheerful welcome to you, Dr. Annamma Odenath. The person who played pivotal role in the materialization of this webinar is none other than Dr. Susan Epen, former President IWSA. Our association with Susan Madam started with the official launch of FOSTER, the Forum for Fostering Scientific Timber, Inquiry and Social Responsibility, an initiative of the Botany Department. Dr. Susan always exhibits keen interest in the welfare of the Botany Department. Currently, Susan Madam is engaged in motivating scientific timber among faculty and students at Union Christian College, Alva, as an adjunct professor in Biosciences group. She is considered as one of the pioneers in transgenic plant research and has developed transgenic plants which could take up heavy metals and degrade organic pollutants. Stanford University has included Dr. Susan Epen in the world 2% top-ranking scientist in the category Plant Biology and Botany. She had been in the editorial board of international journals, In Vitro Plant and BMC Biotechnology. Dr. Susan received Elsevier Award in 2010 for the Best Quoted Paper of the Year. She is also a recipient of UNESCO and British Council fellowships. On behalf of all of us present here, I extend a very warm and sincere welcome to you, dear Susan Madam. Dr. Alfonso Vijay Joseph, the very dynamic, energetic, and hardworking head of the Department of Botany, needs no introduction. She is the driving force behind all our endeavors. She is ever willing to strive hard for the welfare of the department and institution. Her positive attitude, innovative ideas, and creativity have brought many a laurel to the department. Extending a very warm welcome to you, dear Vijaya Madam. Students and researchers from other institutions are also participating in this webinar with much enthusiasm. Most cordial welcome to all of you. All my dear colleagues are present on this virtual platform. A very special welcome to Dr. Elizabeth Joseph, the coordinator of the webinar. It's only with the wholehearted cooperation and support of all the faculty of the department the programs are successfully accomplished. A very warm welcome to all of you, my dear colleagues. The presence of our alumni, research scholars, and students fills this virtual platform with positivity. I'm certain that all of you will be immensely benefited from this webinar. A very cordial and hearty welcome to all our alumni, research scholars, and students. Welcoming each one of you most warmly, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa ma'am, for that warm welcome. Next, I invite Dr. Rita Mukhopadhyay, Vice President, IWSA, to kindly give the introductory speech.
Yeah. Good morning. Good morning to all the 113 audience who is present in this lecture today morning. On behalf of Indian Women Scientist Association, headquartered in Navi Mumbai, I welcome all of you. And it is a lovely morning when an array of so many women scientists have gathered for a Saturday 10:30 lecture. Thank you to the Department of Botany, St. Theresa's College, Ernakulam, for taking up this initiative of organizing popular science lecture under the Board of Nuclear Sciences support. It is a pleasant duty to open up a story a very small story. The story is very long, but I have to coincide it for the audience here. A story to tell about the journey of 48 years of an organization, the IWSA. If I may have the presentation, the first slide.
Yes, ma'am.
You all would be able to see the beautiful campus, the green and beautiful campus. The slide will come up, and as it is coming up, let me tell you, you will be seeing a very large building, and that building was built in 1970s. That was the time when 12 eminent scholars, women scholars, felt the need that there was necessity for a forum for women scientists in this country. And we found out that at that time, our organization was the only one in the whole world. Today, there are a few more women scientists association, but in India, we had worn the torch of this organization way in the 70s. And thanks to all those women who thought so progressively. Today, we carry the eminence of their thinking through our activities in IWSA. And if the slide is coming up, you would see, and thank you for introducing IWSA already. So I will not talk about the details of how we, thank you. On the left, you can see a glimpse of the variety of plants which are flourishing in our Indian Women Scientists Association, Washi's Learning Garden Living Museum. And on the right side of your screens, you can see a beautiful building. And that is the very first working women's hostel, which was constructed in this area of Navi Mumbai. Still today, it is the most secure home for all women who come to live in Bombay for an earning. And this forum is open to all of you to please make a note that if you all are, any one of you is visiting Bombay or moving to Bombay with job, this lecture is another home waiting for hosting you. So that is our Working Women's Hostel. And let me tell you that throughout this 1 year of the world is going through the pandemic of the SARS-CoV-2, our hostel was open, running, thriving. Maybe the hostelites had reduced in their numbers, but they are all back to work. And this is the place where for 1 year we have been able to maintain the security, serenity, and safety, even during the pandemic times. Go through very quickly. There are 11 branches, north Roorkee to the bottom Bangalore. We have 11 branches, and on the side you can see the direction of these branches. And I welcome this forum at St. Teresa's College and your enthusiasm and your support by our Board of Trustee, ex-Board of Trustee member Susan Eapen. Please let us see another branch blooming in that beautiful God's country. Next slide, please. We will now take you through the activities, some of them glimpse through a few celebrations. The Early Child Care Education, which is running in its 25th year, celebrated the Silver Jubilee during the pandemic. During the pandemic, like all other organizations, we too climbed up into the virtual forum, and that is how such ability has fortified us to talk to so many people at one time from the coziness of our homes. So the ECCE celebrated 25 years, and they moved on to an online course which is ongoing for this year, and even for the next session we are up now. This progress up Pan India. It is no more that you have to come physically to our headquarters to do this course. This course is open for any woman between the age of 18 to 50. This has been a successful program where assurance of employment, even when you are 50 years old, happens. So this is a glimpse of how through the ECCE program, we have been able we talk about the different subcommittees, the way we organize our work in ICSA, and the next slide will show Science Aware Committee. And what do we do? That committee takes on their shoulder the responsibility of the masses, the student masses, may it be school children or college students and graduates. The mandate of the society and focused manner. And that's what is happening under the science education initiatives. And you can see that again, is that just yesterday we concluded the science exhibition. So this is our previous exhibitions, and now I'll go to the next slide, which will talk about how we are trying to different platforms of our lecture series. So this is Sun Online, which I just mentioned, and this year's theme was scientists, technologists, and innovators, and there were amazing. So lower in the bottom of the screen, you can see a few glimpses. Which are a new series of lecture which talks about science in our because of the virtual platform. Those famous who came to yes with IFSA. Have I lost my connection? Am I audible? Yeah, I'm
Ma'am,
back.
I think there's some network problem.
Okay, so can we not go to the next slide? Otherwise, I will verbally.
Yes, ma'am. This is the next slide.
Yeah, thank you. So we were talking about the Board of Radiation and Nuclear Sciences support to take science to the masses through popular science lectures. And here at the bottom of the screen are glimpses of few of our posters of the recent lectures. And today's one is one of them. And all of you, it's a pleasure to have all of you on board and to be able to talk about how this support allows us to go to over 20,000 audiences with the mandate of taking science forward. Next slide. Very recent past, we had very popular figures. These are some of the posters, and I'm not sure if you can read them, but the lectures span from all areas of science, management, medicine, up to the very recent, which we had by Tessie Thomas on our space research. The next one. Yes, here is that poster, and that was a lecture where, of course, it commands that much of popularity and enthusiasm. We went overboard and our meet platform fell short. Next one. Next slide, please. Yes, let me tell you about this one, and this is the last one to wrap up this little bit of an introduction of IWSA, is we have a mouthpiece of a newsletter which comes up every quarter. In a year, we publish 3 issues, and this talks about activity worldwide, mostly based on activities of women in science. We cover everything from current to the past, and this is available to all of you when you visit our website, the iwsa.net. And under the publications, you can see our newsletters, the archive. And I would request all of you present here that, as I'm hoping wholeheartedly, along with all of my members of IFSA who are present in this morning's talk, that a new branch blooms with the grace of our of trustee members sitting right there with you all in the same town. And when you all come on board, you all will be part of all our activities. And till then, please do visit the website and consult our activities, consult our newsletter, start to imbibe IWSA like all of us we have. And it's always a pleasure to talk about this organization where all of us work voluntarily and happily give our time to exchange science thoughts with the society. Thank you very much for all the time you have given me, and we are looking forward to the lecture, and such a relevant lecture from the speaker. Thank you. Over to the host.
Thank you, Rita ma'am. Then am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you. It's my pleasure.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, Cynthia, you can continue.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, Cynthia, we can hear you. You can continue.
Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, Cynthia, yes, you are. Please continue.
As a system halted.
Yes, now it is open. Cynthia, kindly go ahead.
Ma'am, Cynthia has left the meeting actually. Probably her system.
Ma'am, Cynthia is facing some technical issues, so she will be joining within a second.
But can I start introducing?
Yes, ma'am. Susan, ma'am, you can
Yeah,
forward
if you
with
can project from your side, the slide that is to be projected.
Actually, she is having the slides.
Okay, doesn't matter. I will just introduce. If she can project, let her go ahead. Okay.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yeah. Already there has been an introduction of Dr. Annama Odanith. However, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Annama Anil Odanith, Associate Professor at DBT ICT Center for Energy Biosciences, Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai. Currently, she teaches a variety of subjects like protein and enzyme engineering, biocatalysis, enzyme technology, etc., etc. She has a wide range of research interests such as biocatalysis and microbial fermentation for waste to value products, secondary agricultural products, mining, redesigning and implementing proteins for food, feed, fuel, and functional molecular synthesis, yeast microbiology and synthetic engineering, byproduct process development, integration and intensification, process development characterization, and scale-up. She has guided a number of research students for getting their PhD and master's degree. She has guided 9 students for their PhD and co-guided 8 students, 14 students, and 8 students are doing a PhD under her guidance at the moment. As far as master's is concerned, she has guided 15 students and 3 are ongoing. At a very young age, Dr. Odanith has a number of research publications and number of patents to her credit. She has published 37 papers in international journals of repute and 1 in national journal. The number of patents is extremely large, with 30 patents to her credit, and she has filed another 10 patents. She's an excellent speaker, and today Dr. Odanith will speak on bio-based energy options from sustainable resources. Dr. Annama, please.
Thanks, ma'am, for the kind introduction that you have given me. I will like to thank IWSA and the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity to present at such a in front of such an audience, because we have almost 100 odd students who are listening to this presentation, and I'm really awed by this response, and I hope I can do justice to the topic that I am going to discuss today. Right. So as ma'am said, I basically belong to the Center for Energy Biosciences, which is at the Institute of Chemical Technology. And we majorly work in the area of implementing energy resources for a wide, from a wide variety of sustainable resources. Now, how we do this and what kind of implementation we have is something that I will take up during the course of the lecture. Okay. Again, my heartfelt thanks to everyone who has enabled this lecture to happen. A couple of instructions or a couple of suggestions that I have is, as we move on, if you have questions, please put them down in the box, and we will be able to answer them depending on I will try and answer them during the lecture itself, because that would give more continuity to the talk. And another part of it is you could go onto the website, you could look at the links, and if there are any questions that you are not able to ask during the lecture, you could write down to me and communicate to me. I am going to switch off my video for reasons of connectivity, so that you have absolute clarity during the presentation. Please don't hesitate to stop me at any point of time during the lecture so that we could make this much more fruitful and interactive. Okay, so thanks everyone. And we start with the lecture now. I will basically start with the topic of sustainability. As in the starting slide, I have put my topic around sustainable resources. Now, what are these sustainable resources, and why is sustainability such a big issue? Now, when we look around us, we are using up our resources in such a manner that we fear over a period of time or in the next decade, we will have limited resources for everything. Okay, time has, I mean, environment and climate change, the social conditions, the economic aspects that we are at today are probably one of the best that mankind has ever seen, and that is because we have very gradually moved from the first industrial revolution to the second, to the third, the fourth, and now we are in between the fourth and the fifth, right? And with improvisation in the standard of living, with improvisation in the tools that we have used, in the communication systems that we have, uh, everything, life has become much more easier, and we do not realize that we are using resources for each of these activities. Go back around 10 years ago, would we have the liberty to have this online meeting or this online lecturing system? The COVID times has made us exploit this system or use this entire platform in a manner that you can disseminate information, education, we can discuss with our partners, the traveling aspects have been reduced, and we could connect with people from different aspects. And that is one of the highlights of the revolutions that we have had over the past decades, and we are currently at a stage where communication, resources, everything as is being used at its optimum level. However, there are a lot of cases where we misuse our resources and therefore we are causing wastage. And in this wastage aspect, the sustainability or the long-term usage or how we would apply these or leave these for the next generation becomes a little bit crucial. There are a couple of aspects that we have in the sustainability angle, but one of the major things that we are going to look at is the environment and economic perspective, and focus basically around the energy requirements that we have to keep the progress of mankind going on as is at the moment. Last year before last, the UN basically released their sustainable development goals, and they put out 17 goals that we have so that we improve improve the lifestyle of the humankind in general. And if you look at these sustainability goals, almost 10 of them have usage of different natural aspects for sustainability. And this is one of the core areas that people are focusing in order to develop next generation fuels and other requirements that we have. Now, our topic here is we wanted to look at a sustainable solution coming from biomass or other resources, plant-based resources exactly, wherein these plant-based resources, can they meet our requirement is the question. Now, before we even ask this question, the thought process should go, do we have enough to make this a sustainable resource? Yes, we do have enough of this. That's the answer that is coming up from multiple sources, because we have a huge amount of plant-based resources in the form of agricultural crops, in the form of grazed biomass in the form of forestry, and also in the form of aquaculture or the seafood aspects. And where all these are being used, these are being used for multiple different applications to meet our food requirements, to meet our feed requirements, also to meet our energy requirements in certain cases, and material requirements. Now, how do you meet energy requirements as of now? We just burn it. So we have wood logs which we burn for fuel. We have compressed or compacted material that we use for fuel. All these are the current energy sources that we are using. However, this slide, the take-home message from this slide is, as we are constantly growing the agricultural crops, and we have the crop residues, the forestry, and the seaweed sources that come from, this entire segment is available to become a sustainable bioeconomy if we use and develop it properly without wastage. Okay, so the basic concept here that we as a group at the Center for Energy Biosciences we follow is that you look around yourselves, whatever carbon sources that we have, be it in the form of solids, liquids, or gases, we try and use them completely for our fuel and material applications. So the topic that we are going to concentrate today is on how to use agri-waste. I will also touch up a little on the municipal waste that we have. The basic concept here is again that you look at the agri-residues, you break them down into platform compounds like sugars, lignin monomers, and the carbohydrate molecules, CHO molecules basically, hydrocarbon molecules, and then take them down to fuel molecules and other materials. The fuels can be in the form of methane, ethanol, methanol, green diesel, hydrogen, all these sources, and the materials are immense that we require, which can come from these availabilities. The simple process or the process outline that we have here is you have to have your feedstock. You need to break it down to the sugars or intermediate building blocks, and finally these independent building blocks will be synthesized or converted to the fuels, chemicals, or power, whichever applications you need. The main thought process that we have to put into this entire exercise has to be threefold. You have to have analysis and sustainability integrated into it. There needs to be an integrated process, and intensification of the process needs to happen, and we need to enable technologies which can be implemented on a large scale. There are many companies which are working in this area. I'll give you a gist of some of the companies that we have in India a little later. So the biomass for a sustainable economy, what are we looking at? We are basically looking at the traditional fibers that we have. Most of them are used for biomaterials at the moment. Whatever is left over, this can be a source for the biofuel. The other thing that we look at is the waste that we have, agro and forestry residues that we have. Suppose like wheat straw, corn, miscanthus. Miscanthus is a specifically grown grass for fuel purposes. However, we are an agricultural country, and there is a lot of these agri waste that we have, which can be converted into biofuel resources. Then you have agro-industry co-products like grape pomace. You can have bagasse. We can have lignin from these materials. You can have husks. You can have hulls, coir. All these are also different kinds of industrial co-products that can be used. Lastly, we have a lot of waste that we have. Carpet mats, wood pellets, cardboard sheets, carbon fibers. All these things also end up in the waste, and we basically burn them or leave them to rot in the dump. Can we use these materials also would be one of the aspects. So all these different sources become then the feed material for building up the sustainable economy. Now the question that you would have is, these are waste materials. If they had to be used, they would have been used in different forms. And that's where the technology aspect steps in, because we need to break these down into a form that is convertible. Right now, over the years, people have used starch-based resources because it's easy to break down. People have used vegetable-based resources because, again, it is easy to break down. However, if you look at leaves or you look at straw, all these things, the forestry residues, these are not easy to break down. Nature itself takes time to break these down. So therefore, we need to put in our chemistry and physics concepts along with our biology ideas to make this convert into a form that is more usable. So based on these biomass types, we have different kinds of fuels that come in. Okay. Fuels like solid fuels, liquid fuels, and gaseous fuels based on the state of the fuel. So I told you right away in the third slide that we already have been using biomass as fuels in terms of food, firewood, wood chips, pellets, charcoal for direct conversion to heat. Okay. However, these do not make up for the travel purposes or for use in jets and all these applications, and therefore we need to look at other resources. So the other resources are basically liquid biofuels or the gaseous biofuels that you have. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
So the liquid biofuels that we have would be bioethanol alcohols, the vegetable oils which are converted to diesel, or the bio oil that we have which can be directly used as furnace oil and other applications. We also have the gaseous biofuel segment, which is basically biogas, biohydrogen, syngas. We are not touching on these at the moment. The main area that we would concentrate today would be the liquid biofuel segment. Now, how are these liquid biofuels made? These liquid biofuels can be made from feedstock material in different forms, meaning the raw material that we take would decide which generation the fuel falls in. So all these, the three feedstocks that we have considered here, or the three generations that we are considered here, are basically culminating to the biofuel, bioalcohol example. And what I'm going to show in the next few slides is how these first generation, second generation, and third generation feedstock materials can be converted into bioalcohol, and what are the processes that are involved in this. Okay. So let's look at first generation biofuels. The first generation biofuels, we are basically looking at storage polysaccharides. Now, what would storage polysaccharides mean? Storage polysaccharides are polysaccharide material or disaccharide material that is basically stored by plants as feed, or that we use as feed or food material. Now, how do we convert this into ethanol? These storage polysaccharides are basically cooked up or pre-processed in some form, and then they are saccharified or broken down into sugar moieties or monosaccharide moieties, which are finally fermented and to ethanol and purified to make the alcohol stream. Okay, the common storage polysaccharides that we have are starch and glycogen. Okay. So if I'm looking at sugarcane, we also have sucrose to deal with, which is also a disaccharide that is used in first generation biofuels. So the starch and glycogen are the storage polysaccharides that we use. So going back, if we look at the different feedstocks that I have listed here, in sugar beet, in sugar cane, sweet sorghum, we may have sucrose containing feedstocks, and the other ones are the starchy materials that we have, which basically have starch in there that you can take down further to alcohol production. Okay, so the sucrose is a disaccharide, as all of you may be knowing, and you need to break this down to glucose and fructose, which further will be converted to ethanol, and all the starch will be converted to glucose for further breakdown to alcohol. Okay, now the structure of the polysaccharide is a determining feature of how the second process in this step, that is the saccharification or breakdown to sugars, happens easily or not. Now, for the first generation biofuels, because these were storage polysaccharides that we are looking at, the chemistry around the breakdown is well established. So you have an enzyme amylase that can actually break down starch into glucose moieties very easily. And therefore, the first generation platform has the following steps, wherein you take starch-rich material, finally grind it into powder, and then you take these powders and convert it with respective enzyme, and the enzyme breaks it down to the component sugar. The component sugar is fermented, and then the fermentation gives us ethanol, which is purified and used as a fuel for process. Okay, so this part of the chain is pretty well established because sugarcane or corn and other resources have been used age-old for alcohol production, even for drinking purposes. So this technology is more or less fine-tuned, and we have specific organisms as well as enzymes which can be used for the purpose. So this can be extended not only to corn, but to rice starch or any other kind of starch that you have, and the process can be implemented. So if you look at countries like the US and Brazil, Brazil has optimized this entire first generation on sugarcane. They extensively grow sugarcane and use this sugarcane juice for production of glucose, and then that glucose and fructose is basically converted to ethanol for fuel purposes. And Brazil is one of the countries where you have cars which run absolutely on ethanol. Today, India has a mandate of around 20% ethanol blending, but most of the ethanol that we generate is also from sugarcane, and this accounts to only around 4.5 to 5% of the mandate of the petrol blending that we can offer. So ethanol is blended into the petrol, and we have almost across the country, we have a 5% petrol, 5% ethanol in all the petrol that is available. Any questions at this point? Okay.
So far, no questions, ma'am.
Yeah. So I move on to the first generation biofuel, the next example of which is from vegetable oil. Sorry, I missed the oil part here. So from vegetable oil, we get to biodiesel. So if I'm looking at the palm imports in the European Union, they almost use 51% of the import for making biodiesel, which can run in cars and trucks. The rest of the percentage, 39% goes for food, animal feed, and cosmetic products, whereas 10% again goes for heating and electricity. So a huge percentage of 61% of the imports is being used for energy purposes. One, our attention majorly is to look at this segment of how palm oil is being used to make biodiesel, which comes as the first generation biofuel. Now here again, what we do is you take, as all of you are well aware, that the oil that we consider are basically triglycerides. Triglycerides wherein the fatty acid component is added to a glycerol backbone, and this is what our oils are composed of. Now this triglyceride, when it is reacted with methanol, releases the fatty acids, and you have methane attached to each of them, which makes it fatty acid methyl esters, which are basically the biodiesel component of the material. So conversion of biodiesel is basically an esterification reaction with methanol. I would request everyone to please mute their mics. So that we can
Deepti Yadav, could you please? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Please continue.
So the byproduct of this reaction is glycerol, and the biodiesel is the FAME that we are using further on. Okay. The production process is pretty simple, where we have crude palm oil which comes in. You are esterifying it using catalyst and methanol. Once esterified, we have two products that come out, mainly FAME and glycerol. The glycerol is a byproduct of the reaction, whereas the FAME is basically washed, dried, filtered, and then it is ready to use as biodiesel. So this is a process wherein vegetable oil is converted to biodiesel, and this biodiesel has further applications. So the process is not limited only to crude palm oil. You can use any other vegetable oil also for the purpose. There is a lot of research work that is going on for the development of the catalyst. The catalyst can be chemical, or it can be a biocatalyst lipase that is used in the process. There is also a mammoth amount of work happening around the stabilization of the FAMEs, so that they do not get oxidized during the storage and give us the same energy efficiency as would be the petroleum-based diesel that is coming in. So this is a process which is focused around building up the building up internal production of biodiesel, so that we can reduce diesel imports from external sources. Right now, in India, what we do is we have a huge mandate around this, and extensive work is going around use of non-vegetable oil. So oil that doesn't go in for cooking, like cotton oil. Then you have oil from different seeds, pumpkin seeds, pomegranate seeds. Then you have oil from different weed categories that you have. All these kinds of oil are being tried to be converted to biodiesel. We also have some amount of work, or government is also pushing for cooking oil-based production, because after cooking basically after frying, the oil tends to decolorize and have a lot of polymeric materials which make it non-edible, and therefore that particular oil can also be used in this manner for production of biodiesel. So from here we move to the next platform, that is second generation biofuels. Now in the second generation biofuels, we are using agricultural waste material, which we collectively call as lignocellulosic biomass. Now the storage polysaccharides and the the bulk plant polysaccharides are completely different. And I mean, as a botany group, you would be very well aware that lignocellulosic, or the plant structure, is made up of lignin, hemicellulose, and cellulose, to be majorly accounting for the bulk material there. Now, if you have to convert this biomass into ethanol, you again have a series of steps which open up the structure, then saccharify it or break it down to glucose moieties or sugar moieties, and then take it to fermentation, and finally purification and alcohol production is done in this manner. Okay, let's look at each of these steps in a little bit of detail. So as I told you, the biocrop that you have and the plant cell that you have can be further amplified, and you basically are looking at microfibrils, and these microfibrils majorly have hemicellulose, lignin, and cellulose as their bulk components. Now, the hemicellulose are basically pentose sugars. The lignin are polynolic material, and then you have the cellulose, which is glucose material. So these, these specific polysaccharides, any specific polysaccharide that you take has a typical structure, and this structure is also dependent on how easily it can be broken down by other resources. Now, if I'm looking at cellulose, cellulose is a uniform polymer or a monopolymer, monosaccharide based single polymer, biochemical entity is there, which is beta glucose, which is linked by beta-1,4 linkages, right? It differs from the other structural polysaccharides in fungi or bacteria, because in many of these we have an amine group that is linked, and in case of bacteria we also have the 4 amino acid group, that is the polypeptide linkage, that the peptidoglycan linkages that come in. And even with chitin, you have the amine group that is associated, making the polymer a little disoriented. What these differ from cellulose is that the intact hydrogen bonding that cellulose has is there is a huge amount of hydrogen bonding, basically because of the influence of the beta-1,4 linkages and also the orientation of the ring structure, which allows the molecule to stack one on top of each other. And this makes the polymer very difficult to break down. So if I am looking at the structural hierarchy in the plant architecture, from the wood, from the raw material, that is the wood or the agricultural waste that you look at, you have a wood fiber, and this wood fiber can be further zoomed in to give us understanding into the cellulose microfibril, and finally the cellulose molecule, which can then be broken down to glucose. Just give me a minute.
But ma'am, I also have
Participants, if you have questions, please put it in the chat box so that at the end of the session we can ask. And
yeah, extremely sorry. So if we walk down from the macroscopic to the microscopic or to the nanostructures of the cellulose system, we basically see that these are small polymers lined up together and firmly held closely in association with each microfibril, not allowing water to enter into the surface or not allowing water to break the hydrogen bonding, thus making this entire system a little complicated to break down. So bacterial or fungal systems do not easily enter into these plant material, biomaterial, and degrade it very easily. I mean, a comparison that I would give is leave a potato outside for some time. The way the fungal infection will come in and it will eat and solubilize the entire potato. However, the same will not happen in the given time frame for a woody plant or a leaf material. It will take time to digest. So even after you put a leaf in the soil, after 15 days, if you remove it, it still will have its architecture intact. Am I right or wrong? right? So in these cases, it's important to understand that the way the plant structure is made, it is not in a manner that is easily accessible for breakdown. And therefore, when we want to use these resources, how do we actually break them down? We actually start to look at what makes the difference and how we can completely dismantle this microfibril arrangement so that we can reach to the cellulose molecule, which can be further then broken down to glucose moieties. So it's a journey that you have to traverse from the tendril helix to the microfibril and finally to the cellulose molecule. So what do we do here? We basically have a series of steps wherein in a very focused manner, we approach the different layers and then finally expose the polymer to enzyme saccharification. Okay. So what essentially is done is first you have a milling process which will grind the entire wood structure into finer particles. And once this dry milling is over, then we also have a wet milling process wherein your entire wood structure is destroyed so that permeability of water can be done. Now, once this permeability of water is happened, the next stage is to autoclave it completely. Now, what autoclaving does is autoclaving gives us a temperature of above 120 degrees Celsius, and it also allows us to apply a certain degree of pressure to the system. So even if we are at 120 degrees Celsius, there is a particular amount of pressure that is being used on the material and which leads to a partial decomposition of the wood component. And what happens after this process is basically the wood structure that was intact with your microfibrils and the hemicellulose are wound around it with the lignin, preserving the integrity after the pre-treatment that is composed of milling as well as the autoclaving or the pressure reaction that you have. You basically break down the entire structure into, you break down the lignin polymers, you break down the cellulosic polymers and disintegrate the entire architecture of the lignocellulosic biomass. And once this disintegration happens, then you have intact polymers that are needed to be taken care of. But the complexity of these polymers also does not end up here. There are a lot of orientations in which the cellulose is arranged. And if once you expose it to thermochemical or purely thermal processes for disintegrating the biomass, the structure undergoes changes whereby you actually have these microfibrils or these monopolymer chains. But these monopolymer chains are not very easily accessible to enzymes again. So there are different strategies or there are enzymes that are out there which basically approach the polymer matrix in different manner and in a stepwise manner degrade the entire polymer. So imagine these enzymes acting on the intact lignocellulosic biomass. They absolutely have no chance because they are not able to absorb onto the material and do the hydrolysis process. Only after the pretreatment is over, these enzymes get accessibility to the polymer fibrils, and once they gain accessibility to the polymer fibrils, they can actually do the hydrolysis part in an easier manner. Okay, so you have different types of cellulases. So whenever we talk about a cellulase cocktail, it is not just one enzyme. There are different enzymes coming from different organisms so that we could build up a cocktail that will attack the polymer and break it down in an efficient manner. So usual cocktails that are provided by different companies have a range of a minimum of at least 4 or 5 different enzymes mixed in different combinations so that these can be used in an efficient manner for the industrial process. Mind you, we are not looking at the natural manner of handling these hydrolysis. We want things to happen at the industrial grade, which is competing with the petroleum industry for production. So the rate at which these reactions have to happen has to be faster, much faster than they happen in the natural conditions. And all the steps that we are doing are just to speed up the reaction rates so that the conversions are much faster. So when I'm talking about the enzyme cocktail, these are basically different groups of enzymes that will act on the polymer matrix in a manner to degrade the polymer matrix and make monosugars out of it. So we have at least 3 broad classes of three broad classes of enzymes. One of them is the endoglucanases, that is endoglucanase 1, 2, and 3. These endoglucanases will break the polymer at different points right across in the chain. We then have cellobiose hydrolases, which are basically enzymes which will attack from the tip, from the ends, and hydrolyze the polymer to generate disaccharides. And finally, we have beta-glucosidases, which actually will take up the disaccharides and break them down to monosaccharides. So these 3 broad classes of enzymes actually work together in a manner to degrade the polymer completely and break it down. However, we also have smaller enzymes or ancillary enzymes that work to oxidize the polymer so that you get a better handle. So a vast amount of work is going on in the area for discovery of these enzymes, usually referred to as enzyme mining, and then producing it on a larger scale and finally using it up for this process. The challenge here is that the enzyme has to be lesser than 500 rupees a kg, even if it is produced recombinant. Okay, so the final goal of this entire first section was that you have biomass types, and these biomass types are pre-treated to get to the cellulose level, and then the cellulose, with the action of enzyme, we would want to make it into soluble sugars. Right. The soluble sugars, the next challenge is how do you convert these sugars into ethanol? As we saw earlier, glucose from starch or glucose from lignocellulosic biomass doesn't make a difference. Right? It is the same glucose, and it is readily accepted by the glycolysis cycle, and from the glycolysis cycle it goes to the fermentation part to give us ethanol. However, the challenge is for the other sugars. So as we saw earlier in our slide, though we didn't take up that part very seriously, but there is another sugar that is available in lignocellulosic biomass, which is hemicellulose. And this hemicellulose is basically composed of pentoses. And pentoses, you can have acetylation, you have acid groups attached to them as well. And therefore, this entire group of sugar or monosaccharides that come in may not be readily accepted into the glycolysis pathway. Okay. I think most of us in our early days, when in the Leninger book chapters, we have seen of which sugars can enter into the glycolysis pathway easily. Right. So many of the pentose sugars cannot enter into this pathway, and therefore it becomes mandatory that the host system or the yeast that you are using for fermentation should also have an active pentose phosphate pathway, wherein the other the other sugars are readily accepted. So xylose and arabinose are usually found in lignocellulosic biomass, and these sugars need to be transported into the cell and used up by the pentose phosphate pathway to give the connectivity to fructose 6-phosphate, which then enters the glycolysis pathway to generate ethanol. So this is a challenge that you have, wherein xylose transporters are usually not present in the yeast that are used for ethanol fermentation, and therefore you need to redesign this entire pathway in there so that you have ready acceptability of or assimilation of the pentose sugars that are there in the agricultural waste. So after all these different segments have been put together, this leads to the production of the second generation biofuels, wherein lignocellulosic biomass is converted to ethanol. Okay. The steps are what we discussed earlier. The biomass is harvested, then it is cut into shreds and pre-treated with heat and chemicals. Once this entire process is over, then it is exposed to enzymes to break it down into monomers, and then these monomers then go for fermentation with microorganisms which assimilate both the glucose and the xylose and convert it into ethanol, which can be purified and distilled and ready for distribution. Okay, is this part clear? Any questions in this point?
So far, no, ma'am. Yes.
So then I move on to the third generation. Now, when we look at the third generation, basically this involves something that will use up carbon dioxide from the environment, or we are using something that we do not absolutely need and converting it into fuel resources. So basically the third generation consists of algae and food waste that we have, and converting these resources to either triglycerides, fatty acids, and proteins, and then converting them via the reactions we discussed earlier, either to algal fuels, biodiesel, or to the aviation fuels that we have. We have different microorganisms which can do this. One of the set is the algal set, and in the algae we have cyanobacteria, we have blue-green algae, we have the green algae, as well as the macroalgae that we have to consider. Now, all these different algal resources that we have could add up to biomass, and they can be used for different purposes. However, at this point, I would like to ask the group a question as to what is the advantage of using algae in this entire process for fuel production. Can anybody tell me an advantage? No?
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, is it that the algae can be produced for a larger amount?
It can be produced for a larger amount. That's not the that is an inherent feature. But can you give me some advantage that the algae can give us in this scenario? The clue coming in from the point that we are using plants also because they are sustainable. So
Excuse me, ma'am.
yeah,
The production, use, and disposal doesn't cause any pollution as such.
you are close. We are close. They also have a means of taking in pollution. The carbon dioxide that is generated can be around in the environment and is responsible for the huge climate change and other things that we have. With large scale production of algae, we can look for quenching this material. Now, if you go back and try and understand how the environment was managing the carbon dioxide earlier, before the industrial revolution, it was basically these oceans that were the primary sources where carbon dioxide was getting utilized and fixed in different forms.
right? There were plants also, but in addition, the oceans were the major quenchers for carbon dioxide. And so therefore, when you look at the oceans and the water bodies around us, they have organisms which could readily take up carbon dioxide and fix it into different forms. One of these are the algal resources that we have. In addition to algae, we also have other bacterial resources which can take up carbon dioxide or gaseous material and convert it into either polysaccharides, or you could take it down to oils. And we could actually track petroleum to the different kinds of microorganisms in the environment which have stored the oils over the years, and because of pressure applied by the formation of different landforms, these have got converted to petroleum crude oil. Right. So what we are trying to do in the third generation is that we are just trying to speed up the evolutionary process, or speed up this fixation process, and trying to extract the material so that it works in a sustainable fashion for us. Okay, so we are moving from utilizing stored resources to producing resources which can be utilized directly. Okay, and that is the concept that is there in the third generation fuels. Now, in this aspect, we can look, when we look at the algal systems have their cell walls in there, which are basically composed of structural polysaccharides. You can have alginate, agarose, carrageenan, cellulose. Most of these can be then converted to monosaccharides, which are used up by wild bacteria for ethanol purposes. You could also have the unnatural monosaccharides being used up by engineered strains, again for ethanol production. On the other hand, we could also look at the different sources of food reserves that the algal system has, wherein through photosynthesis, carbohydrate biosynthesis happens, and these biosynthetic carbohydrates, biosynthesized carbohydrates, are then being broken down to their monosaccharides and used for ethanol production. So you could look at it from different aspects, where the entire biomass as such, and we were discussing this earlier, the biomass as such is being converted to ethanol, but you also have the oil reserves that are there. So this is one of the ways in which algae technology is being pushed out right now, because if you're looking at just fuel production from these algal resources, there is a lot of costs that are associated with cultivating algae on the land, or even in the sea. If you look at, you have to have these specialized containers which are dipped into the ocean bed, and there algae is being grown. So there is a lot of infrastructure cost that is associated with algal cultivation, and because of that, it is a challenge to make it into a viable fuel. And for that purpose, what we are trying to do is we're trying to bring in a lot of value add compounds that can come in from algal resources, because the value add compounds will be low volume, high cost, and can pay for the algal technology or the algal cultivation that is being used up, because these value add compounds have multiple markets, like the aqua feed market, the cosmetic market, the pharma market, the human nutrition market, all of which could actually pay for the algal cultivation that is being done. And after these value add products are extracted, whatever residue is left can be converted into a lignocellulosic hydrolysate, and this hydrolysate can be used for ethanol production. So how you route it through these, how you route your carbon to these green cell factories is very important. At the center, we have got this algal biofuel program, where we are looking at cyanobacterium, microalgae, and all these are being grown up in bags like these, plastic bags like these, in a controlled environment, which is basically permeable to light, but we control the temperature around the unit. Okay, so improved photosynthetic efficiency is something that we are looking at, because India stands in a zone where our light is our major advantage for algal cultivation. We have light throughout the year and light of good quality that can facilitate algal production. Now, if you're looking at countries like the European countries, they have extreme cold conditions, and there under those conditions, the light is a disadvantage. However, their advantage is that their land completely blocks out sea in certain regions, and therefore they have still waters, whereas our ocean is very rough and it is not it will not allow us to do ocean cultivation very effectively, and therefore we need to look at land-based cultivation where biomass of 300 tons per year per hectare can be reached, and you have oil contents more than 25%, and your cost of algal biomass has to be less than 10 cents per kg. Right now, can anybody guess what is the cost of 1 kg of algal biomass? I think that's an assignment that I will give all of you, that you go out there and look out at our very own Google Baba and check what is the cost of algal biomass per kg. So this is one of the challenges in this entire biofuel program, wherein algae needs to come to a cost of roughly around 3 rupees to 5 rupees a kg, because that is what we get our agricultural residues at. So we need to bring it at that cost so that we can think about the future of algal biomass. Okay. Let me quickly take you through the rest of the slides. This is an example of a 3000 liter photobioreactor that we have, wherein you have chilling and all necessary systems associated with it, but it is controlled by the light, environmental light factors. So what you see here are examples of macroalgae being grown in the bags, and these are microalgae or cyanobacteria grown in the bags. Now, what do we do with this microalgal biomass? We can actually put them through a stepwise extraction process and capture the value-add materials from the cellulosic material and take the cellulosics down for biofuels and the value-add materials for using them under different applications, high-value applications. You could put the whole biomass for catalytic liquefaction and convert it into fuel oil, or you could take it for anaerobic digestion, as most of the European countries wherein the macroalgal blooms occur very frequently, they take the macroalgal biomass and put it down to anaerobic digestion for biogas production. Okay. At the institute, we concentrate around the seaweed biorefinery, wherein we are looking at dry sap, which is a fertilizer, a polymer which can be used in food pharma applications, and then a cellulose-rich material that can go as feed. So this is one of the applications that we have developed on seaweeds. The next thing that we go on would be the lipid platform. Now, in the lipid platform, as I showed you earlier, we are using vegetable oil or different plant-based oils for biodiesel production. However, there is another platform that emerges wherein we could look at lignocellulosic waste and use these sugar and lignin resources to take them to triglycerides. So you have simple monomers and also the organic kitchen waste, which can be used by microorganisms for triglycerides. And these triglycerides then open up jet fuels, biodiesel application, crude oil, which can go as furnace oil, and the edible oil, which can have applications. So this material also would basically have the fat splitting, fat modification technology, which is basically continuous generation of methyl esters, and these methyl esters can then go for. So therefore, I mean, what I took you through are the three biofuel solutions that can come in from the plant resources, namely biodiesel substituents, gasoline substituents, the CNG substitutes. I did not take in the gaseous fuels, but all the sugars that we can get from municipal, agricultural, or industrial waste can go for gaseous fuel production as well. And so this is just a schematic representation of how the municipal solid waste that we generate in every day will go down to the biogas unit after grinding, and then this biogas can be used for fuel generation at multiple sources. Now, the advantage of bringing these kind of biomass-based resources is that we end up reducing our carbon footprint, and as we replace the gasoline, diesel, and natural gas with other advanced biofuels, we are actually reducing the emissions that are there from the fossil fuels and overall reducing our carbon dioxide footprint in total. However, what we need to keep in mind is the food to fuel debate that happens and the technological limitations that surround all these different points. So though we have an alternative in the different waste material that we have to use technology advances so that we do not misuse these resources or misuse these wastes as we currently are doing, and convert this opportunity to make fuels and energy resources. So the technology platforms that basically are taken up by the country, and the development is happening in the energy oil crops and the algal technology for biodiesel. People are looking at agricultural waste and residues. There's a lot of research groups that are working in this area for ethanol production, and we are trying to rework the entire biogas or the methanation process so that you could use industrial waste and municipal solid waste for biogas generation for replacement for LPG and CNG resources. Just to give you a flavor of what is being done in India, we have more than 500 scientists across India who are working in biofuel research, and this was primarily possible because Department of Biotechnology put up 5 centers exclusively for energy biosciences. So this is one of the centers is in Mumbai, that is with Institute of Chemical Technology. Then we have one at ICGB in Delhi. IOC has an advanced and bioenergy center at Faridabad. Then you have Pan IIT, that is 5 different IITs have come together to form a center of bioenergy, and latest which joins on to the group is the TERI Center for Excellence in Advanced Biofuels and Biocommodities. The different ministries that are associated with this, you have Ministry of Power, Coal, New and Renewable Energy, Petroleum and Natural Gas, Atomic Energy Department. All of them under the leadership of Niti Aayog are basically pushing very strongly in this direction to get our fuel reserves intact. So in addition to the Synergy centers, we also have a lot of extramural projects that have been funded by the ministries, and a lot of industry groups which are actively working in biofuel research across the country. So the goal is basically to have a complete circular biofuel-based economy wherein we are looking at lignocellulosic waste, algal waste, and waste, that is food waste, and the municipal solid waste that we generate, solid and liquid waste that we generate, to put into a circular bioeconomy process, satisfying the different sustainable goals that we have. So very quickly, let me take you through what the Center for Energy Biosciences does. Is we were set up in 2009, and we were given the job of putting together biology, chemistry, and chemical engineering people to develop multidisciplinary center. Our goals were pretty focused that we have to design molecules, microorganisms, processes, as well as full-scale plants to get this goal done. So for that aspect, we put up 6 different groups along with an IP management group, which will help us work in different areas and come up with a technology which is not refined only in one aspect, but takes care of the entire platform and gives different value-added innovations in each of the section. As I explained to you in the second generation biofuel slides, that it's not concentrated to just the pre-treatment or how you break down. Your breakdown has to be optimum, then the enzyme treatment has to be optimum, the fermentation has to be optimum, the purification has to be optimum, and also the stabilization and storage life has to be optimum. So there are different segments involved in building up a technology platform, and this integration between the different groups helps us to come up with good feasible technologies, as I told you. So what we do is we have approximately around 10 PhD students who look at this aspect of host synthetic biology and host development, majorly to use the sugars and the lignin for a range of value add products, not restricted to only fuel. Because as we move down, we understand that fuel production is not going to be profitable at any point of time. It always, because the crude oil prices keep fluctuating and they are capable of hitting at the lowest, and if ethanol comes out even at a competitive price, we run the risk of not being able to compete with the chemical petroleum industry. And therefore there have to be products, or there have to be biochemicals that are parallelly produced along with the fuel to give us the cost advantage. And for this, we need to engineer many microorganisms which have specific product ranges so that they can easily assimilate the sugars and convert it into products of interest. So for this, we look at the diverse substrate assimilators or non-natural fuel producers, and also superior enzymes to get to the entire platform and come out with the whole range of things. So the opportunity and the potential are immense, and how we put them together is what the DBT Center for Energy Biosciences does. And that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne ma'am. It was a wonderful lecture. I have a couple of questions here by Dr. Rita Mukhopadhyaya. Shall I read it out to you, ma'am? Annama ma'am, shall I read it out to you? Ma'am, your mic is muted. Could you please unmute? Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that
yes
question from Rita ma'am. So basically, ma'am, if you're looking at natural oils extraction from the plant, the quantity that we have is very less. Until it is completely the vegetable oil producing systems. So if I'm looking at algae producing the oil, the extraction methodologies are almost the same. That you have to press and remove the oil, or you have to do a solvent extraction procedure, and then you have further systems to refine the oil and then use it for esterification. And for the biofuel platform, it is the same kind of extraction that we will use. Now, when we are looking at your, with regards to your question of which enzymes plants are responsible, the enzymes, basically the ones that we belong to the oxidation path, the lipid synthesis pathways, the enzymes are the same, but during the, in the process of synthesizing this, we have only a 30% efficiency based on glucose. So if you're doing it through the plant system, which actually captures carbon dioxide and puts the whole process together, it is in a much more efficient way than we can do with microorganisms or other sources which are using glucose. So definitely, plant systems do stand with an advantage there, but we have to compare it with the process intensification that we can do with bacterial systems or microalgal systems. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Yeah, thank you. These clarifications were very helpful. Thank you.
And with regards to the government clearance for recombinant enzymes, the thought process is that the enzyme, the recombinant enzyme, is never coming to the final product, that is ethanol or diesel. Okay, so the problems associated with recombinant products are if the enzyme or the modified plant material comes as the final product before use, then there are clearances issues. However, if we are using enzymes, we are well off and we can do that, because even for high fructose corn syrup, people are using modified recombinant amylases and glucoamylases.
Okay.
So, I mean, the industry is rampant with the usage of recombinant enzymes for food products. Bread that we use, curd, everything has got recombinant enzymes, which are even the detergents that we use basically have recombinant enzymes in there. These are
Very good. You have clarified that, because in our minds the GM was working, so I asked you.
Yeah. So
that means there is a government policy and rules in place where recombinant enzymes for commercial purposes can be
used.
Generated. And I'm also seeing from another point of view where empowerment can come. These lectures are not only for our increase of our knowledge, but is also giving us to think how opportunities open up. So I was thinking that if these are commercially very pliable, then a small scale work of generating these enzymes instead of importing these enzymes can be a source of empowerment.
Yes, there is a lot of focus actually in that direction, because Novozymes and a very select, or you can just take them as one or two companies, have cellulase production, and these monopolize the entire thing. So if tomorrow India moves towards a ethanol economy, we will be highly dependent on these companies, and therefore DBT is actually pushing up a lot of work in the enzyme segment and trying to develop enzyme mining exercises, as well as recombinant organism production. In the sense, you need fungal organisms which are made for excellent secretion. Only then you need the cost aspects of it. So there is a lot of impetus given to this work, and people are openly being invited for carrying out research in this.
That is very important. I think the message has gone to the students that if you want to become an entrepreneur, you can think on those directions. Even growing a large scale of the fungus may be useful for an industry to make it recombinant. Yeah. Thank you. Please continue.
And there are other questions as well.
Yes, so I can see Rosemary. Her question is basically slurry left after biofuel production, and what is it used for? Have you developed low-cost construction materials with byproducts of them? Rosemary, this is a field that you can have people from across the segment to come in from. What we do is we try and develop methodologies which are zero discharge, or develop technologies which have zero discharge systems. Okay, because the main problem, what are you trying to solve? You're trying to use waste, and if we end up making more waste, you don't end up in a circular economy. You are creating more of garbage. So therefore, what we are trying to do is utilize as much as possible in the system, and then the residual things that are left over will finally go to the biogas unit, and whatever comes out from the biogas unit goes back to the soil in a manner that is efficiently utilized. Yes. Your question of low-cost building construction materials coming from this, that is a completely different aspect of the work. And if you look at, if you read the news about Punjab and burning of the agricultural residue there, you will also come up with a lot of news articles how efficiently farmers or associated small-scale entrepreneurs are putting up projects which are utilizing this biomass material in an efficient manner for cardboards, for paper, and multiple other applications that we could not have out earlier. Okay, so increasing awareness is basically helping people to come up with multiple solutions for the entire process. Okay. Does that answer your question, Rosemary? Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. So I can see Susan ma'am asking me whether the commercial costs are, yes ma'am. At the moment, the way we produce, the commercial costs are very high. But this question has two facets. First facet is production, and the second facet is application. Right? In the commercial production part also, we lack hugely because the enzyme units from the natural producers are very low. We need to do a lot of engineering of the organism to actually scale up the production of the protein, and finally the cost of production is also taken into consideration at that point. The second aspect of how you use it, even usage cost is very high. So the enzyme unit that we need for digesting 1 kg of cellulosic material is also very high. So there is a lot of research that is going on in that segment as well to bring down the enzyme cost. So from both these aspects, people are working and trying to come up with better fungal systems for expression of the enzymes. I would refer to, Dr. Shams Yazdani's group at ICGB is doing excellent work in this area, where they are coming up with new CRISPR-based modifications of fungi for producing extracellular proteins. And even the IOCL group, that is Indian Oil Corporation group, has got strains which are producing good amounts of enzyme. And they are basically doing these experiments at the pilot and the commercial scales to see whether they can meet the cost requirements. Our group, on the other hand, works with the second aspect, where we are trying to lower down the enzyme usage so that it makes it more cost effective.
Thank you.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ma'am, I have a doubt. So you just said roughly, could you tell me how long will it take to produce the biofuel?
At the moment, we have 4 projects that are running at the commercial scale. That I would not say running at the commercial scale. 4 projects in India that are putting up commercial plants based on lignocellulosic. So all the oil companies, that is IOCL, BPCL and HPCL, have got plants each. Then there is one more plant coming up at Mangalore refinery, and there is one up in the in the eastern states, which is coming up on bamboo. So there are these 5 projects which are taking the concept to the commercial scale. So 2022-23 is projected as the time period when India will start making commercial bioethanol.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Another question that I have here will be, what would be the prospect of patenting these products? And we can patent it, but we have to go through the biodiversity committee, approve the strains that we have isolated, and also because it is use of the biomass, even the patents around the biofuel methodology would need to be going through the biodiversity committee. Right? So, Alfonso ma'am, does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So I think those are the questions that are there. Anybody else has any question that I'm ready to take?
Ma'am, Vijay has asked that if you could put a word to motivate the students to such application level research.
I always look up at people who are in the area and read their biographies. Right? In this group, we heard Rita ma'am initially, and then we heard Susan ma'am, who have been such huge motivators, because they have paid the way forward and brought to us that it is possible to work and get credits for their work across the globe. So I mean, at every point, we look back at these scientists who have made the route for us, and each individual students, they have carved the platform, they have given us examples for us to move forward. And there are so many problems around us that can be solved by intervention. And we are in a phase where quick money is looked as a point of success. But I don't think that is a point of success. The point of success is where you have done your bit to contribute back to the to the environment that you are living. Only then does it become sustainable. Okay, so making ourselves also sustainable and giving back is an important work that we as individuals have got. So I will leave you with the sustainability concept and put your minds to question whether you are doing your bit to make your earth sustainable or to make the resources that we are using sustainable. That's all from my side.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question? Okay, I guess since it's a really new subject to them also, about biofuels, I thought you really explained it very well, ma'am. Very nicely they have understood, or probably they will get to know about it, about all the different generations of biofuels you have explained very deeply. So since there are no more questions, I guess I'll move on to the last part, the vote of thanks. I now invite Dr. Prasipi Prakashya, Department of Botany, St. Teresa's College, to kindly deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Cynthia. Am I audible, Cynthia?
Yes, yes.
Okay. First of all, let me apologize that my my video is not working. That is why I can't come to the video. My laptop's video is not working. Honorable array of women scientists, our most valued invite guests, teachers, students, teachers from other departments, students from other departments, from various departments, good afternoon all. I, Dr. Prasipi Prakashya, on behalf of the Department of Botany, here together, and on my own behalf, extend a very hearty thanks to all present here. First of all, let me express the deep sense of appreciation to Dr. Lisa Jacob, Associate Professor, Department of Botany and Center for Research, St. Teresa's College, for the beautiful welcome address. Thank you so much, Lisa ma'am. Dr. Rita Mukhopadhyay, Vice President, Indian Women's Scientists Association, Mumbai, took us to a very interesting story. I must remark a proficient sense of gratefulness to Rita Madam for sharing with the 48 years of IFSA and its activities. Thank you, Madam, for gracing this occasion and giving us the opportunity to conduct this program in collaboration with our department. Thank you, Rita Madam. There is much waiting on the vote of thanks to express my emotions to Dr. Susan Epen, former President IFSA, that surely fits the atmosphere. So I show my appreciation to Dr. Epen, who have been the strength of this program. I also would like to thank Madam for introducing the speaker to us. Next, I would like to thank our speaker of the day, Dr. Annama Ordanath, Associate Professor, DBT ICT, Center for Research, Biosciences, Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai, for visiting and enlightening us with your knowledge. That is, we all know that sustainable development is the need of the hour. energy, which is a vital commodity to meet the developing nations, can be, yes, derived from sustainable resources, which enable us to overcome the severe consequences created by the conventional methods. Today's talk was full of knowledge and interesting things. I'm pretty sure the information and the knowledge that ma'am you gave us will definitely help the children, I mean our students, in their studies and in their future research programs as well. Thank you, madam. I also thank my teachers, the department, all the teachers of the Department of Botany and Center for Research for their cooperation. I'm so fortunate to thank the dedicated and very well motivated team of our department who are aware of their task and are very concerned about the results. Special thanks to Dr. Elson Joseph, Associate Professor, Department of Botany, and the coordinator of this program, who efficiently coordinated the function and always demanded perfection from starting to ending. I would like to express my deep sense of gratitude to Dr. Alfonso Vijaya ma'am, head of the Department of Botany, for her unflinching support and guidance throughout this program. I must not forget to thank Ms. Cynthia Dias, research scholar of our department, for working hard from the last few days for this program and for being an expert master of ceremony always. I'm thankful to all the participants present here. We have eminent scientists here, teachers from other departments, students, for coming here and attending the program. Once again, I would like to thank, or I would like to say that we are so glad to all the eminent scientists present here, and we thank you for being with us. It has remained a pronounced pleasure. Thank you all. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prasimis, for those wonderful words. Over to you, Susan ma'am, if you would like to say a few words to us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alfonso Vijay and all the team members for hosting this program. I'm sure that you will host in the future too. I want perhaps a branch of IFSA based in St. Teresa's College. Wish you all the best. Thank you. And thanks especially to Annama and Rita.
Thank you, ma'am.
It was a pleasure. And again, whatever help we can do from our headquarters, please do not hesitate. Let us put the things in place and you all can become a branch to celebrate with us in the 50th year, which will begin in 1 year's time. Thanks and bye to all of you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Rita ma'am and Susan ma'am, for the wonderful invitation. We'll surely collaboration with you in all future endeavors. Thank you all very much.
Great.
Thank you for the excellent lecture, Susan, hosting it. Yeah, thank you. Loved it. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Madhu.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, and I would say bye to everyone. Please tell us to put our videos open so that we can click a picture of everyone.
Yes, I would request all the participants and everyone those who are present here right now on the platform to kindly turn on your videos so that I can take a picture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you, Madhu.
Thank you.
Today we have some other programs also simultaneously taking place in other parts of India. So that's why many are not able to participate.
Hopefully in the future collaborations, we'll be able to attend a few more lectures, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Monday we have a lecture on stem cell medicine. I think I will send you the flyer. Perhaps you can attend if you are interested.
Sure, ma'am. We will circulate it among students as well. Thank you so much.
What about the photograph?
Ma'am, I'll email it to you.
Yeah, okay. I think 117 people have participated.
Roughly 117. I think 120 have registered.
Average, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. See you some
ma'am.
other time. Bye.
Email, ma'am. Bye, ma'am.